So, Berto, lots to get into today. So many emails,
lots to catch up.
both interesting and controversial and light. So it's going to be an episode in which we whiplash back and forth from different tones of discussions. What do you say, Berto?
Sounds awesome.
This is the Psychology and Shoutout podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I sell guanabana pies.
Manamana. Do, 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 do.
Guanabana.
Maladaptive Daydreaming. Someone wrote in, because recently there was a 90 Day Fiancé cast member who lived in Idaho, in rural Idaho. And she is, I believe, a Caucasian woman, heterosexual woman, about, I think, 30-ish or something. I'm not sure. And she talked about how it was hard for her to find love. And so she went online. Oh, and we go into her room and she has all this anime stuff and cosplay stuff and, you know, just she's into Japanese culture and pop culture and anime.
Sounds like we'd get along so far.
Yeah. And she went on an Asian dating site that I think it might even connect people in East Asia to people in the United States. And she met this fella in China named Johnny. I think that's his anglicized name, but I don't know. And they started to date, and there was talk about, and the way she talked about him, she would say, he's my Asian prince and all this kind of stuff. And you just got this impression, or the show was trying to edit it this way, that she was fetishizing him because he was East Asian, or she was only into him because he represented what she thought was in the anime stuff, the fantasy world that she lived in. And so the way she came across was, I mean, who knows, but she came across as kind of out of touch with the quote unquote real world and not very responsible and not kind of naive or even childish in a way. And so, sorry, I just had dinner. So, people wrote in, and one person wrote in and said that they wanted us to talk about maladaptive daydreaming. It's a topic that we often get emails about, which is interesting because I find that it's such a rare thing, but we get a lot of emails about it. But anyway, so this one person wrote in and said, I lived in a fantasy world, and the fantasy world that I had in the past, it had such a crazy hold on me. It was almost like a drug addiction. I was not as motivated to improve my life because my fantasy life was almost like being in a VR simulation 24/7. I just felt like there was no point making friends as my fantasy world was so rich and comforting. If possible, could you talk about maladaptive daydreaming as a phenomenon? Berto, what do you think?
It's so interesting. It comes to mind, we had a conversation in an episode about what would be okay to daydream about and where, should there be boundaries to one's daydreams? And it definitely reminds me of that. So my experience is that there have been definitely times in my life where I sort of get obsessed with a thought or with a person or a thing that I want to do, to the point where it's sort of distracting from just everyday things. Some of this has manifested explicitly, like I'm aware that it's happening. Some of it was totally sort of beyond, underneath my awareness. As an example, when I started therapy, I've told this story a lot, but when I started therapy, I was not aware of my body a lot. That just like I wouldn't really pay attention to things about my body. Yet, I was completely obsessed with right-wing talk show radios and bad traffic. And so every time like I would come to the doctor, my sessions would always begin with me going on these long tirades about it. And I would just like obsess about it. I would come home, I would just think about it a lot. I would argue, whoever would listen, I would just like talk about it. I've also had times where in my life where I was obsessed with a person. This is when I was younger, especially, much younger. But some of it I feel was just maybe normal part of romantic learning and things like that. I definitely think sometimes it was too distracting. And I could see how it could easily grow from there and become damaging. Like maybe you actually become so obsessed with someone that you start stalking them, or maybe you become so obsessed with something that is not necessarily good for you that you start hurting yourself. And it seems really easy to me, honestly, to slip into that without some guardrails, some techniques, some people you can talk to, therapy, things like that. Because as humans, it's almost like there is a part of us that benefited and benefits from a certain amount of obsession, because you need to finish doing your tasks, you need to finish, and you need to do them right. And so you kind of have to have a little bit of that, otherwise maybe you won't be able to eat.
Yeah, right. Meaning that we evolved to see things through when we're
and sort of like get a little obsessed about it. Like think about, like, we got to get that deer. Dude, we've been hunting all day. I know, but if we don't get that deer, we're not going to eat.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, good. And let me talk a little bit about the definitions here. So other terms, by the way, this isn't a DSM diagnosis. It's in the clinical literature, but not a lot. But it is sometimes described as maladaptive daydreaming or excessive daydreaming or pathological daydreaming. Basically, the definition is that it's daydreaming, meaning that you fantasize about things from having just an inner life, like you might think about the future a lot, or you might think of yourself writing fan fiction in your head, or even on paper. You might be writing a fictional novel and daydreaming about that, or living in that world. Or you might be fully engrossed in the Star Wars universe, and that's all you think about all day, and you hang out with people in that world. And we've certainly seen people like this that will, maybe not in our personal life, but online, who seem to take these worlds like extremely seriously. And of course, you and I, Berto, are in that direction. But
absolutely.
Yeah. So it could be that, or I think more commonly with maladaptive daydreaming, it's you're at school or you're at work or you're hanging out with your family, and you don't really want to be there, and you're so compelled to think about this fantasy world, and you are in that world in your mind very often to the point where it interferes with your life. So if you, for example, daydreamed a lot, but it didn't interfere with your life, then that's not maladaptive daydreaming. Right. And when we think about the line between whether it's interfering or not, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. So, because on one level, you could say, well, if someone was doing a lot of daydreaming and for 10 years they didn't have a significant romantic relationship, but they wanted one sort of, then you could argue that their daydreaming was getting in the way of that. But if you ask them, they might say, well, I don't need a romantic relationship because I have such a rich creative world in my head. So from the outside, you would say that doesn't look functional, but from the inside, it might be functional. So we have to be careful about looking at it, or counting the hours in which someone engages in daydreaming and equating that with an automatic maladaptive daydreaming label. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. As an example, and the video game thing is interesting because it's a mix between daydreaming but actually doing the thing. When there was a game called Final Fantasy XI, which came out many years ago it was a multiplayer, massive multiplayer online game, MMO. And I was obsessed with it for about a month from the moment it came out. That's basically like all I did. I even took vacation from work just to play this game.
That's fine. I was missing. Did you think about it a lot when you weren't playing it?
All day and night. I would miss sleep. I was completely obsessed with it. That's all I did for a month.
So it did interfere with your life.
It did interfere. I was absolutely not socializing, with my wife, with others. I was just playing the game, staying up, barely sleeping. Yeah. it definitely interfered. Now, it stopped. It came to an end, and I went back to work. I resumed operations, right? But for that 1 month, I was captured.
Right. So you can imagine if that state went on for 5 years, how your life would go down the tubes, and the ability to pull out of that nosedive would be more difficult over time, because people start pulling away from you. You might lose your job.
Yeah.
You're in this habit, and then what do you have to turn to besides that fantasy world? Yeah. So my experience with this, because over the 14 years of this podcast, I have gotten this question very frequently. And so I will occasionally address it on the podcast, but I've never thought about whether or not I actually had a bout of this until today. And if you had asked me before, I'd been like, no, I don't think so. But actually, I do remember a time about 20 years ago, and I was going through some mildly tough times. And I remember at the time, D&D 3.5, the 3.5 version came out.
We're at 5 now, right?
We're at 5 now, right, of Dungeons and Dragons. And it was, so just give a little background. I played Dungeons and Dragons since the original version. Sometimes it's called basic. There's also first edition, and that there was second edition. And so I played all those like throughout my life since I was 9 years old. And when version 3 came out, it was this total, I think it was the first time Wizards of the Coast got their hands on Dungeons and Dragons, the people who make Magic the Gathering.
And that was a big overhaul then, right?
Yeah, so they had the money and the know-how to really make D&D into a much more cleaner game, because up until that point, the rules were sort of still in the style of Gary Gygax, which was cobbled together from this other game that he made called Chainmail, which is about like battles between armies and not really individual characters. And so, like one of the things about the rules was that armor class, how tough it is to hit you, was if you had the worst armor class, you had 10, and it went down from there. So if you had an armor class of 5, it was better than 10. But you could go to like negative 45 and beyond. So the best armor class was like negative infinity, but the worst armor class was so you could never have armor class 11. Well, maybe there were like certain penalties, but you know what I'm saying? It was like a really just Gary Gygax in his basement coming up with this nerd game for his friends, and it held on to that convention. I don't know.
And so was the negative thing like it subtracted that much from how much you were getting hit?
You would think, Bruno, but no. It was charts, and you had to look up like by hit dice, and it was there was THAC0, and because
I remember THAC0.
Yeah, it was like to hit armor class 0, and then you could use mathematics to figure out from there. But it was just really so D&D version 3 really cleaned that all up. They just made it 10 was the default armor class, and then if it went up, that means you had a better armor class, and if you went down, anyway. So when 3.5 came out, they had tweaked it so perfectly that, because they play tested version 3 for a long time, and when 3.5 came out, I was like, it's so good, and the rules are so well organized, and they opened up all these other options. You could play other races as player characters, and they had all these charts on how to figure that out, and these spells. But, because it still had the old sort of spirit of the game where there were broken spells, like power word kill was you could just point at someone as a wizard and just like you're dead and there's like no save. And so it kind of still had those elements in it. And so it had just really exciting game and so many things to pour over, just literally thousands of rule books. And version 5, I don't think by their ethic, I don't think they ever want to do that again. But anyway, so
yeah, I see.
I'm slipping back into the fantasy world right now, but
you're obsessing again.
Yeah. So I think what it did was, at the time, looking back, I can remember being in the midst of people around me and either literally just looking at one of the rule books the entire time, or mulling things over in my head, like, okay, what if I did that?
Wow.
And then what if I made an adventure that was like this? And what if I did that? And then, especially when you're a dungeon master, you can make up all the characters. And I made up this whole town that called, it's actually in Forgotten Realms, called Feather Falls, but there wasn't much written about it in the lore, and so I expanded on it and really tried to, and I would live in that world, and I was motivated because I wanted to make a really realistic game for my players. But I think it was, looking back, and at the time I thought, well, I'm really into this, and screw you,
Yeah.
I like this. But looking back, I think that I was trying to escape my life at the time, because I was facing things that I didn't have any control over, or really didn't even know what was wrong. I think that was the thing. It's like, I didn't even, if you would have asked me, is anything wrong? I'd have been like, no. But looking back, there were things wrong. And I think that I did that because it gave me a way out. I didn't have to face the weird ambiguities that were happening in my life at the time. So I think I can remember that, and I could imagine people around me noticing it and just being like, man, he's just like checked out,
Oh man.
So I can relate to that. And I think, and that's the idea, is that maladaptive daydreaming, I think, typically is talked about in this way of just like, you got to stop, you got to draw boundaries. But to me, it's more of it's more evidence of the fact that the person isn't going through something that's very handleable or copable to the individual, and they're very creative, and so they create this world to find some solace through it all.
That actually resonates with me in that, not so much in the video game thing, although that might have been going on too. It's just, honestly though, the game was just very addicting. But in what I was saying about my obsession with listening to these stations, it was these radio stations that I would disagree with violently and get so angry. And I was always angry at traffic. So at the time is when I had just started therapy. And the interesting parallels or connections that I make are, one, my dad used to be like that, right? He I've mentioned this before too. He used to just watch the news and just rail at everything that was going on and just be angry at the people on the screen and just anger. And I would see him do that with society as a whole. And I was echoing that. I was imitating this. I was like, all this traffic, why are people like, how can they sit there in this traffic, blah, blah. And I would listen to the radio and be like, oh my gosh, how can, and anyone who could listen, I'm like, can you believe what I heard today? Oh my God, blah, blah. And yet, while I was dealing with all this stuff and all this anger, I wasn't actually paying attention to other needs that I had, like things with my body, or even just more importantly, emotional needs. And that was really interesting. So I was definitely using that obsession to cover up things that I needed to deal with.
Yeah, it's interesting when we expand it beyond, I think, the typical examples of quote unquote maladaptive daydreaming. You can expand it into these other areas that are more, I don't know, mainstream, if you will.
Yeah.
Getting super obsessed with CNN or super obsessed with some weird conspiracy theory. You could imagine
Absolutely.
that world would be an escape for people.
Dude, I just realized, like, more connections, because also talked about this before. I was so obsessed with the O.J. Simpson trial, and I missed classes because I was sitting there like a vegetable on the couch watching it in disbelief. And when 9/11 happened, I was obsessed with the news. And I'm not saying I was alone in this. I know that this is probably something that a lot of us went through, but I was obsessed with the news. I would have to have it on constantly. I was always obsessing about it, thinking about it. What's next? What's next? What's next? And it was this deep fear. And in both of those time periods, I was unaware that I had any work to do mentally, right? Like, it was just not something I was aware of. And yet there was so much for me to start unpacking. Because the OJ thing, I was in college. I was overloaded and didn't realize it. I was very chaotic, didn't realize it. And I forget having to even begin to start dealing with any of my trauma from my childhood. It wasn't even on the horizon. And yet there was this thing, it was just like uncertainty and fear and doubt. And you could just sit there on the couch and be fed all of this, scary information. And the O.J. Simpson trial was scary to me because I didn't understand, where I had seen the chase and it seemed so obvious. And then all of a sudden the trial cast all of reality into doubt. So there was something super addictive about that for me. And then of course 9/11, same thing. I was like, I thought I was safe in my new little bubble of the world. I escaped that tragic disaster down south. Now here I am. Well, guess what? Now your world is thrown into disarray again. And all of this was highly addictive. And I couldn't stop obsessing about these things.
Right. Yeah. And so I think people out there, if you're involved in this sort of coping, it can be very alluring and highly distracting and very engrossing, which is fine. But the question I would ask yourself is, what am I running from? And is there a way out of what I'm running from that would be more functional for me? I can still hold on to this world, and I will, but how am I denying the overall, my overall needs so the way that I would think about it is, forget about the fantasy world you live in. Just think about your needs and start addressing that. So if you were living in a total fantasy world and you start, well, maybe I am kind of maladaptive daydreaming. Think about, well, what do you really need? And an answer to that might be, I need human contact. I need romance. I need sexual contact. I need, physical contact, like hugging or cuddling. I need conversations with actual people. I need cuddly things like animals. I need to feel like I'm getting something done in my life. I want to save money so I can do this one thing. And if you find that there's some barrier to that, to those needs being met, like, well, I'm not worth it, or no one will want to hang out with me, those are the things that you want to start to address, because what I find that a lot of people do is they're just like, well, I need to get rid of my fantasy world. Or people from the outside will say that, you live in a fantasy world, get rid of the fantasy world. And I'm like, no, they don't need to get rid of their fantasy world. The fantasy world is fine. What they need to do is remove the barriers for them to get their needs met, such that they can have a balance in their life regarding their fantasy world. So I want to switch gears and announce something, Berto, that we are having our 14th anniversary show in September.
Didn't we just have our 13th anniversary?
Yeah. And so I might as well announce the dates. It's going to be Saturday, September 17th and 18th, Sunday. And we're going to, because we normally do, like last year we did 13 straight hours of YouTube Live. And we're like, God, 14 hours. And Berto and I are getting old, so 14 hours would not be, I think, healthy for us. Yeah. So we're going to break it up into 2 7-hour chunks, which is actually completely doable, as evidenced by the fact that Berto and I, when we record podcasts, it's not uncommon for us to go literally for 6 hours. Like when we did like the Beatles episode, we went for like 3.5, 4 hours, and then we did another episode or something. Yeah. So 7 hours and 7 hours. So we're going to do Saturday morning on the 17th, I think from 10 to 5 p.m. and then 5 to 12 a.m. on the 18th. So that's one. So you're going to join us on YouTube Live. And by the way, we're not going to record it. Well, I might record it, but I'm not going to publish it because one, that kind of content is pretty shaggy, and I don't really think it rises to the quality that I want to stand by long term. Also, I don't know. I just figure, look, it's like, what were the Tibetan those mandalas that they would make where it would be out of sand and
it's just to make it and then erase it.
Yeah, like in my university, we had some Tibetan monks who were spending, I don't know, an entire week just making this, whatever you call it. I think it's a mandala. And it's like that, you know. I mean, it's not as wonderful as that, but it's
beautiful, and then you put it away.
Yeah, it just goes away. So you got to be there. It's, you know, there's some things that you actually have to show up for, and so. And I know all of you, or I know some of you will be there, and because you have been there in previous times, and I look forward to seeing you again. But if you haven't been there before, you can join us at YouTube Live.
Well, and don't forget, some of them will be square.
That's right. The other thing is that as usual, we're going to have a scholarship and an art fund.
Woo!
So the scholarship is going to be for $3,000, and the art fund. Art grant is the proper term, is going to be for $1,000. So
nice.
If you want to apply to the scholarship, that is should be open now. You go to the website, click on the scholarship button, and you could submit your responses there. And the deadline will be July 15th. So mark that in your calendar. July 15th is the deadline for the scholarship submissions. And we will review them, Stacy, Berto, and I, and decide who should receive the scholarship. And it's always a fun time for us because these individuals are picked on their contribution to social justice in the past, their plans for social justice in the future, and their need for the funds. You know, some people, one person we gave a scholarship to was literally going to have to drop out of their doctoral program because they didn't have money, and the government wasn't going to loan them any more money because they were maxed out. And so we gave her the ability to continue with her work. And so, having already proven themselves to be dedicated to making the world a better place in the past, commitment to the future and plans for that, and a need for the money. The art grant will open on June 15th, so don't email in. There's a lot of submissions, and do not email in until June 15th, 2022, because Stacy will get upset. Not angry, but she gets overwhelmed with this whole process because she's in charge of the scholarships and the art grant and all this stuff. And she's an artist herself, so she takes this really serious. And it was her idea, actually. And also Patron Bronwyn. She also was a contributor.
Nice.
It might have been her idea. But anyway, so do not submit. If you submit anything before June, in fact, I'm not even supposed to be announcing it at this point. So if you submit anything before June 15th, it will be deleted. So wait until June 15th, and you have until July 15th to submit your art grant proposal. And the guidelines for that will be laid out later. But anyway, but you can start with your scholarship stuff now. Almost everyone waits till the last minute, which is fine, but I don't recommend that because there's always people on the day after, and I'm always like, you know, the other thing is the scholarship is mainly, if not really unofficially, for people in graduate school. You know, there's a lot of people that are getting their bachelor's in psychology or something, and although it's great that you're doing that, graduate school is so expensive and so hard, and typically graduate school application individuals are, they're getting a degree in which they are very likely to make a positive difference in the world, and they're on their way. So, master's, doctorate people. The other thing is it will likely be given to someone in some field related to psychology, but not necessarily. So, feel free to submit whatever you want, even if you have a bachelor's degree. But I wouldn't, if you're not a super strong applicant along those lines, I wouldn't bother, and I apologize for that. So that is that, and we will announce the winner at the anniversary show.
Nice. And
look forward to that. All right, let's take a break, Berto. When we get back, more questions. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, Berto, let's do an OPP.
OPP.
An old patron praise. These people became patrons in April of 2020, the beginning of the pandemic. We got
Yikes.
Bernadette from Missouri City, Texas. That's confusing. Missouri City, Texas.
Why do they do this?
Yeah. Kansas City, Missouri. You know, it's like... It's,
Kansas City.
Yeah.
Texas
City, Kansas.
My friend Eric, he lived in Leavenworth in Kansas. Or
there's a
he
Leavenworth
lived
in Kansas? Oh.
Well, he lived in Kansas at some point. And I knew of there was a Leavenworth in Kansas. And then one time he was like, oh, I'm going to go to Leavenworth with my family. And then I'm like, okay. And then he came back. It was only like a weekend. He's like, oh my gosh, it's so great. You should really go. I'm like, why do I want to go there? And it was like a Three's Company episode. We kept not getting that. I thought he was talking about Kansas. And he was talking about just Leavenworth in Washington, which is a lovely Bavarian town.
Yeah.
Until like years later, I swear to God, years later, I'm like, oh, this whole time you were talking about here in Washington? He's like, yes, what the heck? But that's why people shouldn't name cities. There should be one unique name for a city in the world, period. Maybe even in the galaxy.
Yeah. Like Washington, D.C., it's a pet peeve of mine when they just call it Washington.
Oh, yes.
I mean, if you said like, so, the White House in Washington, you'd be like, okay. But they'll literally just be like, so I was in Washington. And you're like, what do you mean?
Yes, clarify.
Yeah. Now, Sherry from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. See, that's pretty good there. We got, the Vibes from Detroit, Michigan. We have Catherine from Somerville, Mass. We have Denali from Fort Collins, Colorado. Tolu from Baltimore, Maryland. We have Daniela, who I believe I've communicated with, from Ackworth, Georgia. Carrie from Austin, Texas. Jeff Marikamen. How do you? That sounds like a name from your part of the world.
Marikamen. I don't know. I've never heard that one.
Jeff and Mary Carmen and Ariel and Bunny, who from God knows where. Or no, Marty Cummins from Miami, Florida. Sylvia from, is that Bruges, Belgium? I didn't know that's how you spelled Bruges. I thought you spelled Bruges a different way. Oh, maybe they misspelled it. Anyway, B-E, that's Belgium, right? That's got to be Belgium.
Yes.
Kiara from Edmonton, Alberta, and Angela from Bakersfield, California. Thank you so much for being patrons and staying patrons through all this time. All right, so I want to talk about the Northman, Berto. The movie.
Oh my God!
How many Bertos out of 10 would you give it?
I give it 10 Bertos.
Yeah. So we saw it with your brother as well,
yes.
And was it IMAX? Was that an IMAX?
It's one of those Dolby AMC.
It felt like an IMAX. It was a very tall, big screen, and the theater was very steep, so like you didn't have to look at the back of their head, you know what I mean?
No. And it made it feel really larger than life.
Yeah. So the whole time, especially the first half, I was like, this movie is a cinematic masterpiece. The amount of one shots that are in this movie is, because usually in a movie you might have like one shot, meaning there's no cuts. Like a classic is Goodfellas, when they're going into that restaurant bar and they go in through the back door, and it's this long shot by Martin Scorsese. And of course you have to coordinate everybody. No one can make a mistake. The cameraman has to be able to navigate all these different ups and downs, and so. And if you're actually recording audio at the same time, all that has to work out. No one can fall down, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so I was watching it, and I just thought, this was just a masterpiece in cinematography and directing.
Yeah, like the invasion of that fort.
Yeah, it was all one shot.
Show them approaching, then climbing up, getting over, getting down.
I think there was a break there. It was sort of like 1917, right? Like that supposedly is one constant shot, but of course it's not. There are little points where you can tell they must have spliced it there. And in that shot, that scene, I think there was a splice when they got to the top of the wall, because you see a little room, a little wood wall where it would be easy to blend it in.
But it feels so fluid.
Yeah, but even just the to the wall and after the wall. And it was amazing because the stunts, because usually the way that you hide bad stunts and action is through editing. And when, like in John Wick, for example, like it takes pride in no cuts. It just shows you Keanu Reeves getting into a very well choreographed battle with 10 different thugs, and they have to practice it for like one scene. Keanu Reeves might have to practice that literally for like a month, and it's a very complicated choreographed set of movements, because real fighting never looks very good. Like if you ever seen people in real life having a fight, like there's a lot of missed punches.
Well, even in something like the UFC, which is already bound by rules and they're encouraged to make it more of a spectacle, even there it's kind of a mess.
Right. Exactly. So, and to make it look super cool, like in John Wick or the Northman, like you have to really know what you're doing. Like the choreographer has to know what they're doing. The actors have to know it. The stunt people, the costume people, the lighting, everything has to just be spot on. And there were some scenes in this movie I just like, my good, I don't think I've ever seen something so impressive before. I mean, I've seen impressive scenes, but I thought, wow. And there was never a point, particularly in the first half of the movie, that I was pulled out of the storyline. There's some pretty wild scenes, like there's a drug-filled religious scene that they go on.
By the way,
with the shaman, played by Willem Dafoe.
And by the way, some of the shots in that scene are like, because they do these things where they'll show us just a face, or they'll show us like a thing, and the room is they're like in this cave sort of thing, so it's kind of dark, but then you see the light of them from the firelight, and seeing it in that big screen, it was so striking. Like I kind of felt a little bit of the buzz of whatever they were taking. Yeah,
and I think that's what the writer-director Robert Eggers is just so good at, because of course he made The Witch and The Lighthouse, is he really does transform you into that world by, I don't know how to describe it, but he manipulates everything that's happening. The sound in this movie was just incredible.
Amazing.
And the content and the emotion and the dialogue and the costume, like everything gets you into that world. The Witch I loved and felt very much pulled into that world. The Lighthouse I freaking hated.
Well, you and I watched The Lighthouse and we were both bored.
I mean, I respect it. The acting, the writing, the risk he took, the cinematography.
It didn't look striking. It looked striking.
But I don't think I've ever been as bored in a movie. Honestly, like when I watched Biodome with Pauly Shore, I was a little less bored than watching The Lighthouse. I mean, now The Lighthouse is a better movie, obviously, than Biodome.
There were parts during The Lighthouse that I did find interesting, especially at the beginning. I was definitely intrigued. I think we were both very intrigued when it started. It's got this, again, striking look and really puzzling, like, what's going to happen? And it was just as it developed that we were both sort of like, okay. And it's not because it was weird. We both love some of our favorite movies are freaking bizarre. Yeah. But it was just not.
Yeah, David Lynch is one of my favorite of all time. And Mulholland Drive literally makes no sense. And he even wrote it that way. And yet I love that movie. It's one of my, top movies of all time. So, and there are other surreal movies that I love as well. But I
have no problem with surreal. I have no problem with, there's nothing I was like, oh, shocking, I'm offended. No, none of that. It was just boring.
I just thought, anyway. So I was kind of worried about the Northman because he made The Witch, which I loved, and then he made The Lighthouse, and I thought, are we going further? But the trailer made it look very much not like either movie, really.
Yes,
but
there's definitely different.
Well, there's definitely a through line, especially with The Witch, because the integration the visceral sense of ritual and spirits and religion. You know, like when we hear about the Salem witch trial, you know, which is kind of where the witch is derived from in terms of inspiration, I'm guessing. You hear about these people in early United States colonies talking about witches and burning witches at the stake, the Salem witch trials, this kind of thing. And you're just like, what is going on with you people? Like, how could you possibly come to that conclusion as a society and as a government? But when you watch The Witch, he makes it so you go, oh, I get it now. Yeah. I understand why that would happen. And he doesn't explain it. You know, he doesn't go like in history. He just shows you a world that's, you know, plausible and exposes you to the belief system and to the fears and to the, you know, the emotions of that time and how they're intertwined with the culture at the time and their limited knowledge and the things that they, you know, they held up and privileged as important to them. And the Northman, right, I felt did that so well, right?
I agree that is common. I would even say in The Lighthouse, because there's all those same elements are there as well.
Right.
It's just that in the Northman, unlike the other two, and yeah, I also love The Witch, but unlike the other two, it was a full character arc for the hero. You know, it was a hero's journey. My brother pointed out it was like 5 acts, like a Shakespeare play.
Yeah.
And that was quite different. You know, the Witch is fantastic, and yet it is structured like a horror movie. And The Lighthouse is, call it what you will, but it is sort of a surreal presentation. This one, even though it had all the fantastical elements, first of all, those are presented with plausible deniability. Like it could have just been in their head or whatever. But even with all those elements, you're never forgetting what the hero's journey that you're on is and what's supposed to happen. And he also does interesting things that subvert your expectation as to what is going to happen to your hero.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ending, you know, number of revelations, you know, before he goes to the lava mountain with his mom and his half brother, spoiler alert. I mean, I won't spoil that part, the rest of it, but he has, I think, a very complicated emotional journey at that time that I found to be very believable and something that I think a lot of other filmmakers would have, I don't know, rounded out the edges to make it more, I don't know, just more mainstream or something.
Right.
And although I wasn't a fan of, I'll just say the kiss, that kind of scene, I'm always like, okay, I mean, I guess maybe, but you know, do we have to make everything into a sexual scene, you know? But it didn't. The movie was so good that moment, I just kind of went with it. It didn't really bother me.
Can I offer you an interpretation though? That
are you going to spoil it? Because
I'm not spoiling it, but what I am saying is that there was a strong theme in this movie that was about how unempowered women were in that history.
Oh, I see.
And there are elements about this where in a normal movie, like you said, like if you're watching Thor or you're watching any normal fantasy movie and things like that, the hero and the thing the hero is doing and everything are generally glorified and they're not sort of besmirched in the process of telling the story. This movie does this really well where it shows you both sides and it makes this point that, hey, the things you normally would romanticize about maybe what the hero is or where they come from, you kind of have to throw that out the window because history is not really like that and the reality of the world is not like that. And part of it is this, like, that women had a very difficult place in that world where they were more of a commodity, something that was transactioned upon, not really, you know. And so that scene in particular, again, without spoiling anything, to me, it was demonstrating that one of the few things that the woman in that situation would have been her sexuality to try to bargain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I read it similarly, for sure. And yeah, but now I will say I'm very curious about what women think of this movie, because for me, at the end, I was just like, so at the end, I thought, yeah, definitely a 9 out of 10, like a strong 9 out of 10. And then I was talking to your brother, and he took it as a massive insult. He's like, it's a 10 out of 10. He's like, well, and he had such contempt in his voice. I love it. He was just like, and it was like a little version of you. And he's like, well, what's one of your 10s? And I was like, well, Clockwork Orange, Brazil, and this, and then he kind of pulled back, and he's like, I guess I haven't seen those movies in a while.
You should have thrown in his face, Mad Max Fury Road, and then I would have been like,
I really love that movie.
J'accuse.
And actually saw that movie with you and the aforementioned Eric, actually.
And I really enjoyed that movie.
Yeah, looking back, like I've seen scenes from that movie, and I'm kind of like, meh. But at the time, since it'd been so long since we'd entered a good version of that world, I thought it was great. Anyway, so he started going off about all the reasons why he would give it a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
And I was reminded, because it's kind of a long movie, and
it is.
I was reminded, I was reminded about how good it was, particularly, again, like I said, the first half. The second half is also very, very good, but it felt just a little less perfect.
Right, like if you were grading it, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm just dipping it slightly.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I would, but I could understand why you would, because it does take a different turn.
Well, it's not a turn so much. It's just a tonal, it kind of gets a little longer and a little, I don't know how to describe it, but the beginning I just felt like was so perfectly realized. But
it's like the second half
me to bring it up to a 10, so I've now ranked it a 10.
It's like the second half requires more, sophistication, maybe higher brain power to be able to really appreciate. And that's for you, it was not quite. That?
Yeah. So Alexander Skarsgård plays the lead. Nicole Kidman plays his mom. Ethan Hawke plays his dad. Anya Taylor-Joy plays his love interest.
But by the way, Ethan Hawke.
Yeah, Ethan Hawke
did an amazing
big surprise. Yeah. When I saw his face, I'm like, but the makeup, the hair he had just made him. And the other thing that I noticed, by the way, Bjork plays like a shaman, and Willem Dafoe plays a shaman.
Which you called it out. I didn't recognize her at first. You're like,
yeah, I mean, well, one, she has this very face obscuring costume on,
right?
But her voice,
the accent was there.
Yeah. Well. I don't know. I've seen a lot of interviews with Bjork, and and then I was like, I bet you anything that's Bjork, because this is supposed to be on Iceland.
Her speaking has a cadence that's unmistakable. You're right.
Yeah, she's a very, Anyway, so, what was I saying about that? Anyway, so
you were saying the characters, the actor. Sorry.
Ethan
Hawke.
Anyway, who cares? But bad reviews, Berto. Okay, Rotten Tomatoes. Critics, what score?
Critics must have gone crazy. 98%.
89.
What? Oh, what?
Well, 98 is, that's like.
I know.
Yeah, but
I would think this is the kind of movie. Oh, but wait a minute though. No, because it's kind of an action movie.
Right. So that's what I was saying. It's like I'm curious about what women would think, because it's a very macho movie. Like it. Yeah. It's not like. I don't know what you call it, exploitative of women the way like a action movie in the 90s would have been, and they definitely have strong characters in Nicole Kidman and Anya Taylor-Joy, but it just has masculinity written all over this thing, and it's pretty gory. There's intestines that are coming out of someone's belly at some point, and
there are some scenes that are very gory and shocking, and you should only watch it if you're.
Not that women don't like those kinds of scenes, but I'm just wondering, because, Sopranos, certainly there's a lot of women that like Sopranos, but I'm just going to take a guess and say that the majority of the super fans of Sopranos is there's a lot of dudes. Audience score, Berto.
Okay, that one is I'm going to dock that one because of the violence and the thing. So I'm going to go 75.
64.
What? Oh.
Yeah.
That's so much lower than I even thought.
Which, yeah, I'm really surprised by that because, you know, I would imagine that the people who would go to a movie like this would be people that were
group.
Yeah, would be into an action Viking movie, right?
I wonder if the previews did it a disservice then, because maybe
people did. People said that. But I didn't understand that. Why do you think that happened?
Okay, because honestly, here's the thing. I didn't know much about this movie. I'd seen like part of a preview. I had no idea who it was by. So therefore I didn't even think, oh, this is by the Witch, you know, part 2.
So wait, while we're watching the movie, you did not know this was
No. Leading up to going to the movie. I probably, when we finally made the plan and I bought the tickets, I like knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
But leading up to it, having seen either part, maybe half of a preview or something, I thought, oh, this is cool. It looks like a Viking action movie, and Vikings are cool. I bet you that's what most or a lot of people thought. It's like they're going to see an updated Conan or something.
Well, or a sort of what do you call it, Michael Bay style? Kind of movie.
Vikings of the Sea.
Yeah, just like straightforward, no artsy stuff.
Oh, and it's presented as like this straightforward kind of vengeance story, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna avenge you, mother. I will kill thee.
It very much is that. It very much is that.
And it is, but it is not like, it is not a John Wick movie. And, you know, nothing against John Wick. It's just not that kind of movie.
Right, exactly. Some bad reviews. Someone said, terrible movie, extremely slow and morbid.
Slow?
Yeah, slow. I could see it. So here's the thing. I can't relate to the Northman, but I can relate to these people giving it bad reviews because when I saw The Lighthouse by the same writer-director, there were all these people like, oh my God, it was so exciting and it was so good. And I was like, it was slow as all get out and boring as hell. What are you talking about? So, you know, I think it could be this Robert Eggers magic that when he puts it into a movie, you know, you don't know how, you can't predict how you're going to feel about it because people that you and I very much respect, like Colin, for example, loved The Lighthouse. I mean, just loved it. And also liked The Witch.
What was the Rotten Tomato score for the audience? See, I'm looking it up. 72%.
On The Lighthouse?
On The Lighthouse.
What was the Rotten Tomato? What was the critics?
The Tomato Meter was 90%.
Yeah.
Dude, that's not fair.
So it's a similar kind of thing.
So fine on the critics, but the audience score is quite a bit higher.
Right. Yeah.
That's crazy. For The Lighthouse.
But you probably, you know, knew from the
Oh, I see. Yes. The preview might have prepared you better in The Lighthouse.
I think the Northman was, I know the Northman was a lot more backed by the studio, a lot more money, a lot more money went into the the advertising of it. And so I think it pulled in large crowds of people and people who probably wouldn't like The Witch or The White House, let alone, and the Northman. Another person said, could someone have opened a history book for a brief moment? It would have been nice had they watched even one episode of the Vikings from the History Channel. This is the first and only 1-star review I've ever had. So there were a lot of reviews like this, like that it was historically inaccurate and they should watch these other Viking shows that are also on. And I can't attest to the...
I have zero knowledge other than my Age of Empires gaming about this period of time. All I know is that to me, you know, I was sitting next to our other friend Ron, and halfway through the movie, when such terrible things are happening, he says to me, and we thought our lives were hard. And it's true. I get this sense watching this movie of, oh man, there's a rough living back then, you know. And I don't know. Yeah, like, did they all take ashwagandha or whatever the heck they were taking? Did they all, you know, was that the right god they worshipped in that part of I don't know. I honestly don't know. So they might all be right that historically it's inaccurate. I was certainly not watching it for historical accuracy. I was watching it for entertainment and enjoyment, and it was amazing from those for me.
Well, I did hear that Robert Eggers is a super nerd on history and had like very knowledgeable historians on the set with him. So was he riffing? Well, yeah, of course he is, because there's no historical documents enough that would guide how you should make things look or sound or whatever.
Well, I wonder if it's like that the Valkyrie doesn't look exactly like the way that Valkyries flying on their horses actually looked.
Yeah, I don't know. So there's that. But I do know that he really does try to put us back into that place. Like I think a quote from him was, I can't remember what he was saying, but he basically was saying that he wants to really recreate the setting and then create a non-anachronistic story within that setting that people can relate to. You know, instead of writing a story about ancient Rome and making it about, say, a Supreme Court and an abortion, for example, you know, because there's a lot of examples like that he actually tries to find a story within that actual world that would be culturally accurate, and yet make it interesting to people today.
I mean, that I did find it effective in that sense. The other thing is, and again, this doesn't prove anything, but as we said, we've been playing a lot of H4. When they invaded the Rus encampment, dude, that looked like a Rus fortress from the game. Yeah. And the people in it seemed, I was like, oh, wow, did they just play Age of Empires 4?
Yeah. Now, by the way, I don't want to be flip about Supreme Court and abortion. We're actually going to talk about that in another episode. So, more to come on that. Switching gears, Berto, Paul McCartney, how did you like the concert?
So here's the deal. It's the third time I've seen Paul. It's likely the last, but not only because he's getting old and might be his final concert, but I'm probably... this is good, you know. I almost feel like I should have stopped at the last one. The last one I saw him at, you and I were at the same concert without knowing, right? Because I was with Shun and you were in a different place. But it was at Safeco, and it was the first time anyone did a concert at that big stadium. I guess is Safeco still Safeco? No, it's got another name.
T-Mobile.
T-Mobile. Okay, but man, that concert was amazing. 3 hours long. He played every great song. He had the Foo Fighters the Nirvana surviving members play. This concert couldn't quite match, but still, this guy, 80, and he plays for 3 hours, and he plays all the instruments still. He does a really good singing job for his age, and just energy-wise, you're looking at him. He's got more energy than us in the crowd. The other thing is, I took my daughter, my 11-year-old, and this part was a little
because she's been into the Beatles now more and more.
Yeah, she watched Get Back, which is crazy.
But was she into the Beatles before that?
She knew about the Beatles because of me. It's kind of hard.
But Get Back really got her into the Beatles.
Yeah, and
really?
She was saying, because she draws, she's kind of she likes drawing a lot, and so she appreciated. Because music's fine for her, but she's not like obsessed with music. Yet seeing the Get Back documentary, she appreciated it from the perspective of, oh, this is an interesting look into how people create art together. And these were her words. Like I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yes, that's what you're seeing. So we go to the concert. She does know a lot of the songs, and I even played her I played her Ram, the Ram album as an extra prep, but when the concert starts, I'm like, oh my gosh, I screwed up. Because one, I got us floor tickets, which I thought, oh, this is cool, we'll be on the floor. But it was kind of like far back on the floor, and everyone was standing, and everyone was like 7 feet tall. Yeah. So the poor thing couldn't really see much. Second, I just forgot, I don't go to that many concerts nowadays. I forgot how loud they are. And so the concert starts, she's holding her ears in pain. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go get her some earplugs. So I got us earplugs. And then we were fidgeting with the earplugs, and she was getting annoyed at me because I couldn't put them in the right way. And then we're listening, and then she keeps saying, I think my right ear is busted, Daddy. I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah, I don't think it's like all I can hear is static. I think it broke. I'm like, no, it's okay. So I'm sitting there thinking, all right, well, I screwed up. This is a total disaster. She's going to never like music again.
Yeah, and just so people also understand, ushers were coming around making kids not stand on the chairs because there were some kids standing on the chairs, and I'm just like, why can't they stand on the chair? Yeah. But anyway, so she's what, like 4 feet tall, and she's just looking at the backs of the people in front the entire concert.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm like, get in the hallway there, or the little, between the chairs, just to look at the screen. But you know what? At the end of the concert, I'm like, what did you think? Bracing myself. She's like, that was awesome. Thank you for bringing me. So in the end, she had a good time.
Yeah, she's learning how to lie well too.
Well, that's true too. But we left on a high note. We didn't stay for the encore, but we left with "Hey Jude," and that was great.
Yeah, yeah.
What about you?
This is the 4th time I've seen him. I saw him at the Kingdome in 1989-ish.
Oh, wow.
I saw him at T-Mobile, and that show was so amazing, and our seats were terrible. I was like in the upper nosebleeder seats, but the concert was so good. I mean, his voice was still with him.
Oh yeah.
He played something like 40 songs. It was like,
and he did like Helter Skelter or some screamer at like the end.
Yeah,
like in 3 hours.
Yeah, then I saw him maybe 5 years later at Key Arena or Climate Pledge Arena, and his voice was noticeably going at that point. And I remember really liking the concert, and I bought the ticket. It was just a single ticket online, like at the last minute, because sometimes they'll put up one ticket on sale, right? And so it was behind us. We were on the floor. My seat last time was about 20 rows back from where we were, but it was up a couple rows, so I could see him the entire time. And so when we were thinking about getting these tickets, we had this early access, and I'm thinking, okay, you know what? Let's splurge. This is probably the last time.
Yeah.
I have a little bit more money now, and let's get some good seats. And I don't go to concerts that much anymore. Or pandemic, I haven't really done anything like that. So let's splurge. Let's get a really good seat. Let's get up close on the floor. And same. When we arrived, I'm like, I might as well be in the bleeders because I still can't see him. You know what I mean? I guess he's a little less small in my field of vision, but not appreciably so. Not certainly worth what we spent on the tickets, by the way.
No, not at all. And just now I know, like with a little kid, it's a complete waste of money and time.
Yeah, I mean, my brother and sister-in-law saw him the next night, and they had much cheaper seats, but they were up in the stands and had full view of the stage the entire time, and didn't. I mean, I'm tall. I'm 6'1", so, and yet because people fucking film. So, look, I film concerts. Okay, I do that, but here are some little tips, people. 1, turn your screen's brightness down because it doesn't need to be that bright because you're in almost a pitch black room. 2, do not use your stupid flash because that light, the photons, disperse by the reverse square law by the time it gets to the stage, which means like literally 3 photons are reaching Paul McCartney's face. And unless you don't understand in case you don't understand what photons are, that doesn't mean anything. 3 photons, nothing. So, and 3, only film 5 seconds at a time because no one wants to see more than 5 seconds of a concert in which you have shitty seats and you're filming someone playing on stage. So it's 5 seconds. So take your phone out, make sure your flash is off, turn the brightness down, and 5 seconds only. Because why? There are people behind you, you idiots.
But how are you going to remember the concert if you don't film the whole thing with your
God, so I'm standing there, and I have to, because we're so far back, it was almost like the worst case scenario, because if we were 20 rows back, we would have been up a couple rows into, elevation wise, which would have been better. If we were 20 rows in front of us, we would have been closer to the stage, and the stage would have been more elevated in relation to where we were. This was like the perfect spot where you can't really see anything. Now, I will say I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I went, and what are you going to do? You just sort of, I've never been able to afford floor seats before at a show like that. And I guess I just learned a lesson with that.
And by the time, when I was trying to buy them, there was almost nothing left on the floor. And the ones that were left, that were closer, were like 3 times as much or something.
Really?
It was, because they just,
right.
They can charge ridiculous amounts.
Yeah. And that's brand new prices? That's like off the shelf prices?
That was in Ticketmaster.
Yeah. Right. So that's not even resale.
Yeah.
But yeah, good show. I cried a few times. He didn't play yesterday, which
he didn't. Yeah.
I thought he would, but that's fine. I mean, he played Blackbird and other...
Oh, the Blackbird was awesome. That video he had?
Yeah. Well, he did that last time. So that's another thing about this concert was like there's a fair amount of overlap between his last. In fact, there's a lot of overlap.
Because he didn't do that at Safeco, right? Or
Safeco. It was more like a traditional concert in which there were like longer sections of him in certain instruments, if you will. Whereas this one, it was almost identical to the last concert, and he comes out with his bass, I believe. Yeah. Then he switches to guitar. Then he switches to piano. Then he switches to acoustic. And then the stage is sort of stripped down, and they do a few acoustic songs. And the drummer comes out with just a couple drums, And then they switch back to a rock song, and then they, so it was very similar to that whole thing. But anyway, it was good. It was good to see. And one thing I liked about him at this concert, as opposed to others, is that he seemed very relaxed on stage. Like he told a number of stories that some stories I'd heard before, but others I hadn't. And they're really touching moments about John and George. I wanted to see something about Linda, but she was on screen a couple times, but he never said, maybe because his current wife was in the audience. And by the way, then we find out the next day, concert in Seattle, because he had 2 nights.
You sent me the article.
He performed with Johnny Depp. So Johnny Depp, I think, from the video, recorded himself playing guitar to one of his newer songs, and they spliced it in. So on the big screen, that's giant screen behind Paul McCartney, you see Johnny Depp playing the guitar, and Paul played the whole song with him. And from my understanding, Paul didn't really say anything like, "We stand with Johnny Depp," but he, and so I didn't even know this, but that Johnny Depp and Paul McCartney are friends and have collaborated musically for a long time. I knew that Johnny Depp was a guitarist, but I didn't know he was any good.
I didn't know that. I didn't even know he played an instrument. So.
Well, so before he was an actor, he was a musician. He, you know how like there's certain, like Keanu Reeves, for example, they join a band, and you're just like, or your friend that we were talking about the other day.
From oh my God, yes.
What's it from?
From Rushmore.
Oh, right. Schwartzman, Jason
Schwartzman.
So he's in a band. So you think, Phantom. You're just famous now and you're trying to shoehorn yourself. But with Johnny Depp anyway, he was like a legit musician trying to make it in his teens and early 20s, and then kind of fell into acting at that point, Anyway, so I don't know what to think about it and I'm guessing at some point, Berto, you and I have to do a long form episode about this whole trial and all that it entails. But what's your take on it right now? Just a quick take on it.
So there was a moment in time, I don't remember when it was. It was maybe a year ago, a couple of years ago, whatever, where information had been coming out about Johnny Depp. And I was really sad at the time because I always thought, he was a cool dude, a nice dude, and all these things. That video surfaced where he was like super angry and throwing things or breaking things. I was like, oh no, what's the deal? I think Disney started distancing him a bit, things like this. And then time goes by. And then the story that starts coming out is a little different, that, wait, maybe we don't know the whole story here. And then this trial comes. And I've watched bits and pieces, and I'm like, because, at first I thought she was suing him. And then I started watching. I'm like, oh wait, what's going on? And then it's just so supernatural almost that you could have scripted this in a movie and be like, wow, who wrote this crazy ass script? My take is that he unfortunately, he might have some bad taste in women, honestly. She seems a little too chaotic, and like he got embroiled in some things with her, and she seemed abusive. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So what I'll say is that most of the people who communicate with me and most of the people that are in my echo chamber are either saying, geez, it looks like Amber Heard is mostly to blame, or 100% Amber Heard is to blame. She's manipulative. Johnny Depp is 100% the victim, and she lied about almost everything that she has claimed, and it's just one big falsehood. And by the way, those people, even the extremes, there is no gender association with that. People of all genders are, in my circle anyway, are very much against Amber Heard. And yet I do know there are people who, when they look at all the evidence online and in the trial, the two trials, they see Amber Heard as defending herself as a victim. And maybe there's some, questionable things about her personality, or, she paints a picture that might be a little one-sided, but overall she's absolutely the victim. And what I'll say is that I've been down the road so often with couples like this in real life that I can tell you that from my perspective, I can't tell. And maybe I'll have a better idea as I wade my way through the data, but people have been sending me like, oh, you got to see this video, or you got to listen to this audio. And, and I will. And yeah, it seems to paint a picture that Amber Heard is, more problematic than Johnny Depp. There's a lot of hard evidence that actually kind of points that direction. But I'll tell you, like I said, when you really work at the ground level with these couples and you hear from them and they're not embroiled in some sort of big media thing, you just realize like some of these cases can be very confusing. Yeah. And it's distressful because we want to know the answer, and we also don't want to see someone being abused. We also don't want to see someone being falsely accused. We also don't want to see someone being victim blamed or denied their victim status by society that can't see that sort of thing. So, I'm not just avoiding coming down on one side or the other because I'm trying to avoid people hating me. I literally I'm just not convinced of anything at this point. And I'm not saying that people aren't right, but I'm worried, or I'm prepared. I'm going to wade through the data, but I'm also prepared to conclude at the end that, if I were to take a bet, maybe I would say this or that, but I would still at that point say I'll probably never really know.
And that's totally fair, I think. For me, it's a case of not having seen all of it, certainly not being there, not knowing what really happened in every single case, but just that every single clip I've seen does not make her look good.
Yeah.
And maybe that is just selective bias on YouTube, and that is quite possible. It's just I just keep seeing clip after clip where I'm like, oh man, kind of chaotic.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is it possible that a woman with borderline histrionic would lie and scheme or be extremely distorted, controlling, violent, jealous, abusive, hostile, at the same time as being clingy and insecure? Yeah, I've experienced that firsthand. I know.
Right.
I know all about that situation. Not everyone with borderline and histrionic would do this, of course, but that condition and the trauma reactivity and the attachment behaviors thereof can absolutely result in what I think a lot of people assume is happening.
Yeah.
And can that person get away with it because they're a woman? Absolutely. That can happen. And it happens a lot. So is a massive injustice happening potentially with Johnny Depp? I don't know. But does that injustice, that the way I described it, happen to partners, whether, regardless of gender, but perhaps to a lot of men who defend themselves or, get pushed into drunken rages in self-defense, so to speak? Yeah, that happens. And it's largely ignored, or the husband is the one that gets accused, or, yeah. So, or the husband doesn't even know that they're actually being abused because they don't even know that that's a possible thing. Yeah, that happens a lot. Also, can a woman be abused and freak out at times, and then that's the recordings that you hear? Yeah. So,
totally.
We don't know, and we might not ever know. So I think we just have to, as I always say, whatever's being triggered on us, let's take care of ourselves, 1. 2, let's try to change our society. 1, the Me Too movement is still a good thing. We still want to generally believe people and generally support people when they come forward and generally protect them from, the movements to try to shut up victims. Definitely. While also understanding that if someone comes forward, it's not always legit. But so let's support people. Let's be inviting. Let's not jump to any conclusions. Let's commend people when they do come forward, but also let's just not blindly believe everything that someone says. And, and also around men, who are victims. We have a lot of work to do. And I think this case actually does help to promote the idea that men can be victims too. So, who knows about Johnny and Amber, but, we know what we need to do for our society, and, let's get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, that's why one of the things I do wish we all did is calm down a bit when things are, when you hear a news item, when something comes out, and instead of immediately burning people at the stake, just let facts play out, let courts do their thing, you can have an opinion if you want, but we are overreactive and we're ready to go have a public execution. That's the first part. The second part is that, well, even if it is becoming clear that there is a clear abuse or something is true, I think we also need to maybe look at ways to learn from it and not just point the finger and demonize, which definitely needs to be done in many cases, and we've done it with some people, very notorious super abusers. It needs to be done, and yet we also, in my opinion, should see what lessons we can take, we can learn. And when the offenses are what I'd call smaller or something like that, can we actually not only learn from that but heal those wounds? Because what otherwise happens, and it's not just with sexual offenses stuff, there's almost with every topic lately, this is the way we are, is something I disagree with, and so we got to jump on it, and we got to really go to war, and there's no room for reflection, meditation, growth. It's just, let's shut down the thing we disagree with, and that's happening with almost any topic.
Yeah.
And it's too much. I want to learn and grow instead of just kill and burn.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our fans are interested in that too. I mean, when I'm watching these videos on YouTube and publishing the audio to the podcast file, the audio podcast feed, it's me talking about all the possibilities and never saying one thing or the other because I don't know. And so I think there's an occasional listener that'll be annoyed that I'm not on one side or the other yet. But I think most people are along for that ride as well. I think there's a as Nixon said, there's a silent majority.
Yeah.
Not to bring up Nixon as a wise individual, but I suspect there's a lot more people. One of the things that with Elon Musk possibly or did buy Twitter or whatever, and then there's all these people, like there's a massive liberal exodus from Twitter, right? And I don't use Twitter really, and so I don't care. Yeah. And two, whenever I hear about Twitter, it's usually when things are going badly. So I'm sure there's a lot of good things that are happening on Twitter. But I think, well, yeah, who cares? Just let it burn to the ground. I mean, I don't hear that about Instagram. Like I don't hear about this massive problem on Instagram with everyone trying to cancel each other all the time. That's a Twitter thing. And people on Twitter tend to think Twitter is the world. And Newsbreak, it's not. There's a small minority of people who use Twitter on a daily basis, and two, there's a even smaller minority who are either trying or inadvertently getting into the limelight. I'm guessing the vast majority of people tweeting are like, look at my cat, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't think we shouldn't be confused that there's this massive amount of like anger and rage in the world, but just because we see a couple examples of it.
That thing you're saying about Twitter feeling like they're the center, that resonates because I also am not really on Twitter much, but so often I'll see a post on Reddit or on Dig or on other sites like such and such person posts this thing and Twitter destroys them. Like that's a common thing that it's like Twitter destroyed, Twitter buried, Twitter burned, Twitter. And that's
like
part of
matters.
what I'm talking about.
It's
like, come on, let's not. Even stupid stuff. Like I saw the other day, someone made a super dumb point about space or something, and it's like Twitter's like correcting them really condescendingly. It's like that's a really dumb point, or about evolution or what have you. Even points that I would agree with or say, that person's being clearly uninformed. But do we have to like make them look like idiots and destroy them and everything? Some things maybe the answer is yes, right? If someone's advocating for violence and maybe we should all rise up as a society and really shut them down. But everything, every topic, the choice of coffee in the morning, everything.
Yeah. No, right. I mean, I'm sure some Twitter users out there are like, no, it's a good place. And, okay, great. But not for me. I don't even really understand
I'm not
format.
Just going off on Twitter. I mean, just in general,
Yeah.
So, we spent a couple million years interacting via in-person or maybe yelling at a distance and never learning or developing any systems, any pieces of tooling to deal with non-faces, putting words that our brain recognizes in a real-time medium, right? So as humans, we're just not used to this. That's if someone on the street or you're at the grocery store, you're buying things, and someone's like, and you see someone say something like that you hear they're supporting Trump, for example. Most of us, some will, but most of us are not gonna confront them in their face and be like, "That's because your IQ is super low and you need to get out." We're not necessarily gonna do that.
Yeah.
But online, we all do it. We just can't help ourselves. We're like, I see something I sort of disagree with. And look, I will throw myself under the bus. I've been so guilty of this in my past, and even with total trivial stuff. I was saying the flavor of coffee in the morning. I probably would have started a war about food, or part of it is just tongue in cheek, right? I think, like, if I have an opinion about a movie, I'm going to die on a hill defending it. But that said, it is that instinct that goes awry. It's what do you mean episode 1 is a good, and let's go to war. And then you make it about everything. And then some topics get really serious. And then, that's where we all just get out of control.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.